Okay, can you send me the link?
One. Okay, guys, we just went live, and we're gonna go through a little overview, and then Richard is gonna hand us questions that you guys have been asking on the Reddit, and that's like really the best place to ask questions. There's also a group chat on the live video, which we also I think we'll be able to answer from, but having questions come in on one place is ideal because it's just simpler. And Richard's gonna handle the questions that have come in and are gonna come in. Okay, so
do you want to just introduce yourself again, Doug?
Yeah, I'm Douglas Pike. I've been basically the lead developer of VeriCoin since 2014, and I co-founded it with Patrick Nosker. And us together, we've been developing VeriCoin and ultimately now the binary chain as our contribution to cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. And we've had a lot of evolution of the technology over the years, and we're actually really excited about this next phase. And I'll give a quick overview of what we've been doing over the course of 2017, and then I think we'll take questions and go into what's coming up. So basically, what we're doing is we're designing a system where we have a currency and a reserve, and the currency is proof of stake, and the reserve is proof of work. And we find that basically this is a near optimal solution for having transactions that are very low cost on chain, and at the same time having security, because we can enhance security with as decentralized as possible mining consensus, as well as a proof of stake consensus, and we can have consensus input from two separate chains, and ultimately that's from two separate groups on two separate networks that have a diverse range of incentives and motivations. And if when we connect ultimately the binary chain together, we're going to have blocks coming in from Verium miners that process VeriCoin blocks. And the concept here is we can increase the block frequency with additional mining power. And as the mining power increases, the block frequency also increases. And then some of those blocks will come on to the VeriCoin chain and process the currency transaction. So we have the digital reserve securing the currency, and the digital reserve has higher fees to create a strong incentive for high security mining. And the currency has extremely low fees, but enhanced security from the miners. So together we have basically a system that is scaling with computational power. And because Verium is CPU mining, that computational power ends up being like a median CPU hardware that exists on the network. So our scaling mechanism is basically tethered to a medium CPU hardware infrastructure, and block frequency will increase, the ability to scale transactions will increase, the confirmation time will decrease, all while keeping the currency fees low. So this is the binary chain, and what we've been doing in the past year is basically preparing for this pairing. So we've been working on converting all the hashing that occurs on both VeriCoin for POS and Verium for POW into assembly to make it as efficient as possible. And we're also porting VeriCoin and Verium into the most recent Bitcoin core code base to basically upgrade the blockchain database code that VeriCoin and Verium are based off of. And then once those code bases are on the latest Bitcoin code base, we can basically essentially merge the two code bases and create the unified wallet, which we're codenaming Gemini, which will allow you to be on both networks at the same time, mine and or stake and also do some cool things that'll be part of the feature set for the binary chain. So we basically have been building the infrastructure out to create this this merge between the two chains and get all this added benefit.
Cool. So you want me to introduce myself now?
Yeah.
All right. So my name is Patrick Nosker, and I've been friends with Doug for a long time. And in 2014, as he mentioned, we created VeriCoin, and since then, a lot has happened. You know, in 2016, we created Verium. That was the same year I finished my PhD at Rutgers, and now I've moved into finance. So I'm working with mostly biotech stocks because that's what my academic background's in. But of course, I'm telling everyone about VeriCoin, and some of them are interested actually. But anyway, so I've been more occupied than I used to be when I was a student, so I've had to take a little bit of a step back, but still working on creating this binary chain ecosystem, because it really it's pretty inspiring to be able to work on the stuff you think is cool. And back in 2014, actually 2013, our first chats between Doug and I about how to create something that we thought would really improve on what there is, rather than sort of be a derivative like a lot of other coins are. It sort of fits that philosophy of building a more secure, decentralized ecosystem that provides, solves a lot of the problems that we saw potentially could affect Bitcoin. So, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the high fees and slow transaction times. That was one of the things we wanted to, we sort of saw that as a problem back then, and it wasn't really a problem, but now it's really come to fruition, and it's a real problem. And so you see Bitcoin has to move either to off-chain solutions such as Lightning, or you sort of have to, not use it, you use something else like Litecoin or VeriCoin for all your low-cost transactions. And so with binary chain, it allows us to solve that scaling problem dynamically, auto-adjusting through the code. And that was sort of something Satoshi alluded to earlier. They would worry about it when it got there, but then they could put in fixes that would apply, so you don't have to keep patching the code and keep hard forking. And so the idea behind VeriCoin was, we have this incentive system where you have interest rate changes depending on how important it is for you to be staking. So if not many people are staking, if you start staking, you'll get a higher interest payment. Likewise, Verium, we had, dynamic stuff where, the more people are mining, the faster the blocks are, because that means more people are probably using the network. And you get paid a little bit less because it's probably going up in value. So these are sort of the critical elements that we programmed in that happen automatically. We don't need to change anything. We don't need to update the code to get these scaling solutions across. And that was sort of our initial vision. And Verium sort of came in when we were thinking about, proof of stake doesn't really have any real intrinsic draw, a pairing with any commodity or any work. And, by definition, proof of stake isn't proof of work. And so we thought it would be really interesting to pair it. And some people have talked, or I saw a question on Reddit at least, asking, what's the difference between this and a coin that's both? Well, you have coins like PureCoin, which is one that has both proof of stake and proof of work. But in PureCoin, proof of stake doesn't count for block validity. It's not used to demonstrate any rigor of the block. Like it doesn't help with security at all. The proof of work part is the part that keeps PureCoin secure. And this dual blockchain system, the opposite. Okay.
The proof of stake part. Yeah.
Right. You're right. So basically, only one of the two is used for security, and in this ecosystem, both are used for security. In addition, you allow this sort of dynamic interaction between commodity prices versus currency prices, which you see all the time with oil and dollars, right? They move independently. There's no real reason they should be one thing, because it doesn't really make sense. Nobody, ever since currencies were introduced back, with the trading of seashells and other stuff, you didn't see things tied together permanently fixed to one exchange rate. And it's good to have a lot of these fluctuations, because it really allows true supply and demand to take effect.
Yeah, and I'll actually add to this too. it's quite interesting. So when we were first talking about designing the mechanism for scaling with Verium, I remember Bitcoin fees at like 50 cents, and we were like, wow, that's really high. It's gotten a lot worse. And basically, there's been no consensus about how to handle it. So Lightning Network, which is going to have some great benefits, but it's a situation where it's not really a choice. It's like a necessity, where transactions actually have to be off-chain to be able to scale them. There's at this point no other solution because no one can agree to a mechanism otherwise. So now this is a potential problem where a system that is intended to prevent third parties is creating an environment where third parties could potentially get a foothold. It could be that Lightning Network works out very well and stays decentralized, which would be ideal. But being in a situation where you need more than just the blockchain and the consensus system that approves transactions so that the average person can have cheap transactions, that alone is a risk. So we've designed a system where we can have a auto-scaling mechanism on-chain, and as far as we can project out, that covers us for all practical transactions that would take place on the binary chain. And then as computing power increases, the block frequency will also increase overall. So we have basically not just a theoretical Moore's law peg to scaling or something like that. We actually have input from the miners that are using CPU hardware that is proportional to our scaling mechanism. Richard, do you want to introduce yourself and then go into the questions?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Verimad, or I go by Richard as well. I'm the project manager and community manager. So a lot of the times when you guys are talking on Slack or Reddit or Telegram, I'm going to be the one you guys are going to be talking to. So I'm around most of the time helping with the project with various things that the developers need help with. And yeah, so I'm just helping out with the project and making sure that we're a success. So I'm just going to be reading some questions from Reddit and the chat, and possibly Slack too. So if you guys are on YouTube right now, and you're on Slack as well, so you can just send us some questions in the general chat there if you guys want us to answer some questions for you. So the first question I got is from Reddit. Is there any difference between the binary chain and sidechains and other blockchains that are getting into the space? So I guess this guy's asking what the difference between the binary chain and, let's say, a sidechain would be.
You want to take this one, Pat, or me?
Yeah, I can address a little bit. And so I guess, ever since Segwits happened on Bitcoin, Litecoin, VeriCoin, etc., there've been a lot of talk about these sidechains, and people have been talking about this since before VeriCoin was started. For other reasons. First there were some sidechains where Bitcoins are actually burned in order to create some value, which doesn't really make any sense to me. But basically, sidechains have been around with the idea that you can host stuff that you couldn't embed on the Bitcoin blockchain. So back in the day, people were thinking about using, back when the transaction volume was low, people were thinking about using Bitcoin to do things like message or embed messages into the blockchain. And so Bitcoin had a limit and has a limit of, it's actually pretty small number of kilobytes you can embed into the blockchain, because they realize, if people are messaging on it, it's probably not going to have much room for transactions. So basically the way these sidechains work is they're another chain that holds things like a blockchain does, but they're not backed by any work or stake, but they embed the transactional data, their hashes they embed into the blockchain. So you can look at the Bitcoin blockchain, see a hash for something, and see some very minimal amount of information, but you don't see the whole, everything. So like if I were messaging Doug, for example, you wouldn't see the message on it. You'd see a hash of the transaction that includes the message. You'd have to go back and it would reference you to the new chain look at. So they inherently have less security because they're not backed by the work that Bitcoin's backed by. They're not backed by stake, such as in VeriCoin. And because of that, they're prone to attack. And there's some sort of new attempts at doing this, like IOTA, for example, uses these DAGs, which are these sort of, it's like a descending net of nodes where everyone has sort of a say. But unfortunately, I think we've seen already, it's easy to attack these things using denial of service attacks, or actually there's many techniques. I don't really want to get into them because I don't want too many people attacking another cryptocurrency, but it requires that the IOTA group runs some centralization to basically make it so the network doesn't just fall apart. And when you have sidechains and other sort of mechanisms like this, you lose a huge amount of security. And it's really a reason that all really, big transactions, if I'm going to move, $10,000, I wouldn't want to do it on a sidechain because I want to make sure it's completely immutable.
Okay. Doug, you want to add to that, or?
No, I think Pat covered it good.
Okay. Next one. Do we have an ETA on the release of the Binary Chain Whitepaper? I think Doug's working on that.
We don't. I mean, in the case of the white paper, it's not like in our so basically as a rule we don't give ETAs because we've learned that they can change because everything has to work and everything has to. Bugs can suddenly appear the day before release, and then things can get hairy, and like Pat said, I mean, if you don't have a secure system, you might as well just use Visa or something. You might as well just have a centralized system that is polished and mature. So when it comes to blockchain technology, you need a secure system that works in the security model in which it's designed. So we can't always guarantee ETAs. Now, regarding the white paper itself, the exact words that are used to describe the technology will be dependent on the ultimate final parameters of the technology itself. So we actually have to have essentially the binary chain protocol parameters in testnet, matured to the point where we're getting ready for release to be able to finalize the white paper. So I'm not going to give an ETA, but basically it'll come not too long before the release of Binary Chain, which we have some target dates for later in the year, but they're basically just targets right now.
Yeah, so I'll speak a little bit about how what we need for Binary Chain. So there's a few really important things. So basically, if you think about Binary Chain, it's the idea is it can improve the security of VeriCoin by allowing Verium miners to help create some blocks. And you don't get security unless you have security on Verium, which has gotten a lot better. And if you look at the hash rate of Verium and the difficulty, which is related to the hash rate, you see it's going up, but it's not more than when one big miner decides to get on. You can see when a big miner starts to mine, somebody that has a data center that has idling computers or something, which is actually something we've encountered. There's a guy who really is a believer in Verium, and every time his computers in his data center are sitting idle, he decides, why don't I just mine Verium with them? They're already sitting. You might as well do something with them. You can see hash rate jumps of 20–30% just from one guy, and we don't want that to become a potential problem. Now, we don't think he's going, or anyone like that is intentionally going to attack, but we need to be sure it's not going to happen. Likewise, you see the distribution of the hash rate on pools pretty uneven, and you had issues like this back in 2014, 2015 with Bitcoin. You saw a lot of people mining on one pool, and they basically had to shut down signups to allow people to move to other pools and to get the hash rate, so it wasn't so much that one pool operator could attack. And it's really important if you're mining Verium that you're careful to not be on the biggest pool at all times if it's above 30% or so of the hash rate. And so we don't want to enable something that's going to make VeriCoin less secure with the idea that it'll make it more secure. It basically goes completely contrarian to the idea of improving VeriCoin security. And that's really critical. You know, there's all these nice other things that come with binary chain, but we can't compromise security to get those things.
Yeah, and I'll say one of the solutions to the distribution of the hash rate that we're working on, which will help, is P2 pool, and the option in the user interface, the main wallet, to mine not just solo but also to a P2 pool, and we're going to try and build out the P2 pool infrastructure as decentralized as possible, where each full node is also a P2 pool node if they choose to be a P2 pool miner, not a solo miner. And so basically, in a way, what this will do is it will be far more decentralized than the current centralized pool Bitcoin Verium network. And it will help a lot, basically drop the percentages of each pool as new people coming on will be in this P2 pool network. It's not 100% decentralized, but it's far more decentralized than a standard pool that exists on, say, Bitcoin and every other proof of work currency. So one of the ways we're going to try and get to that security level is via this mechanism. The other benefit is we're working on a solution so that the payments will come in more frequently than solo mining. They still won't be super frequent because Verium has a higher transaction fee. So it'll be in a balance with the transaction fee itself, which is part of the incentive design of Verium, is that the miners be paid well via transaction fees in addition to rewards. And in VeriCoin, the currency, the fees are literally just spam control. So we will have more frequent payouts if you're mining at the P2 pool than solo mining, because the mining hash rate of Verium has grown exponentially. So has the time between getting a solo mined block. So this P2 pool implementation will help with decentralization of the mining as well as payout frequency, and we're actively working on that right now.
Okay. Let's see here. So we got a question about the website. So we're just working on it right now currently. We're trying to hit probably the first couple of weeks of February. Hopefully the new site will be ready to launch. We're just currently working on it right now. Let's see here.
I'm not working on it, but I saw a demo of it and it looks really, really good.
It looks great.
So,
yeah, looks really slick. Yeah, we're trying to just make it as easy as possible to get all the information on the website. So our website right now is like pretty in depth. So we're trying to make it a little easier to navigate. So I had one about what are you guys' thoughts on the forever growing blockchain size? How will VeriCoin and Verium plan to tackle this issue in the future? Will Moore's law off-chain transactions or a strategy that will solve this?
Okay, so I can take this one, and Pat, if you want to add to it. So one of the benefits of having the binary chain is we can actually split data, or inherently data is split across the two chains. So in the case of the security model, effectively, which will enable us to have more scaling, more transaction speed via mining. All the transactions related to mining occur on one chain with its own 2 megabyte cap, and all the transactions related to currency and spending occur on another chain. So just the mere reality of the binary chain will enable basically a bifurcation basically of the data. Like if you're just a Verium miner, you don't need the VeriCoin blockchain, and vice versa. If you're running full node on both, then you will need both data sets. But basically, the way we have the scaling mechanism is the data will increase proportional to mining power. That's basically the design. Just like the scaling, it's the same mechanism. If the block frequency is increasing, more data is being produced. So we have a mechanism in place that is proportional to mining power, which is from an average CPU on the network. So we kind of have a block data mechanism that's tethered to an effective Moore's law type phenomenon. And we'll be obviously also looking into different things that are in the pipeline in the cryptocurrency space that minimize the need for all possible data at all times, sharding, what have you. But all that stuff is basically vaporware at this point. So you know, we'll definitely be trying to optimize that over time. But we have a mechanism essentially tethered to our effective Moore's law for blockchain size.
So sort of on that topic, and I think a couple of the questions touched on this that haven't been asked yet, but there have been some questions like, are we going to add Lightning Network? Are we going to add Segwit and stuff? And those are potential solutions. Like if our blockchain design isn't sufficient down the road, we might want something like that for, a quick $1 or something transaction. And one of the nice things that we're doing right now is we're migrating the code base to the more recent Bitcoin code base, which allows and already has the integration hooks for Segwit and Lightning Network. So these are things that we'll be able to add pretty trivially once our code base is up to date. And Verium, like Doug mentioned, is it's about ready. We're actually testing it now. And VeriCoin, because Verium and VeriCoin are based on the same VeriCoin code base, it'll be easy to move that code base over. So if we decide, if we think, and if the miners and if the holders of VeriCoin decide, we want some of the features that come with Segwit, we want some of the features that come with Lightning Network, it would be pretty easy for us to just turn that on. So, that's down the road. For right now, it's not really an issue. VeriCoin's blockchain size is about 1.8 gigabytes, and Verium's is less than 100 megabytes. So these aren't things we need to start thinking about yet, but down the road we can.
And then I'll also say that the distinction in our case is we have an automatic on-chain scaling mechanism, so we won't depend on Lightning Network. But if Lightning Network makes the best results in the best decentralized exchanges, for instance, then that would be a good reason for us to incorporate Segwit and beyond Lightning Network. But the distinction here is we don't need Lightning Network for scaling. We have a mechanism in place. If for some reason that mechanism is insufficient, we can use Lightning Network, or we can use it optionally for decentralized exchanges, what have you. So I think that's the big distinction. We don't need it. As far as our scaling design is set up, but it's an option as well.
Okay. Just one sec here. Okay, so transactions per second. This is like a big conversation in the crypto space right now. Can you give an update on the Verium VeriCoin transaction per second comparison with newer theoretical competitors like XRB and ADA? And there's also another question that goes along with that. Should people care about transactions per second?
Okay, I'll start, and then maybe we both comment on this, Pat, because this is a pretty often talked about topic. So here's the deal, basically. If you have a centralized system, you can have an insane amount of transactions per second. If you don't have the necessity for an insane amount of transactions per second, then you don't need the capacity for it. Now, if you're in a decentralized blockchain system, really high throughput is in a sense part of a scarce resource of the design process, because there's redundancy, there's a latency of the data transfer. Basically, if you don't want a third party, there's limitations regarding transactions per second that are dependent on the internet latency across the world, and how the data can propagate primarily. So what we have with the binary chain is a system that we think is sufficient for our growth trajectory. So for instance, VeriCoin right now is 70 transactions per second. Bitcoin right now is maxing out around 7 transactions per second.
Doug timed out there.
Well, I guess while he's coming back, I'll talk a little bit about some of the theoretical limits. So like I was mentioning before, IOTA, you have some, and really anything that uses these acyclic graphs, no matter how they're designed, you have basically anyone that is on the network can become a confirmer of a transaction. And with that, you have the possibility for somebody that has a lot of nodes to be able to attack. And it's a lot like having a lot of nodes in proof of stake, except in proof of stake, you're required to own the coins too. In order to attack a system that has really high throughput using a DAG system, all you need to do is just exist and maybe send a small transaction from yourself to another one of your nodes or something. And because there's basically no fees for these transactions, it's really, really exploitable. And you can basically flood the network with all sorts of transactions and make it so other ones will time out or not go through. And so, yeah, you have this potential, but rarely do things actually ever reach the point where where you maintain security with having these high throughput systems. So I don't know if it's really a great solution to have these systems. Of course, as we were mentioning with VeriCoin and Verium, we're not looking to get millions of transactions per second or anything to that scale, because we don't want people to be putting stuff on the blockchain that isn't at least a little bit important. And for space reasons, for security reasons, we want to have an immutable blockchain that everyone can download and look at every transaction, every piece of the transaction history. So ideally, for very trivial things like, I have my 10-cent, coupon to Starbucks or whatever. I don't want that to be transacted across the blockchain, because it doesn't really make sense for everyone to know that that happened. You're going to see some off-chain things for stuff like that.
Okay, Doug, you back? Oh, dropped out again. So it's like it's just you and me, Pat. Okay, so go on to the next one here. Okay, so as Verium prices change or increase, will the static 0.2 fee be adjusted similar to other cryptos?
So we've actually been talking about it a little bit. I think, yeah, we're going to see the Verium transaction fee go down, and not only because the price of Verium has gone up, although that is definitely, we originally put it in at 0.2 Verium back when Verium was worth only 25 cents or even less, in order to make it so people don't want to just send transactions to just send transactions. We wanted people to feel like they should keep their Verium stationary and not move it around for no reason, because of what we were basically just talking about. We don't want all this spam on the blockchain. But not only is money an issue, but also the number of transactions sent is an issue. And as more and more people are using Verium, we don't need to have such high fees, because the miners are getting a lot of additional Verium just from mining the transactions. So it was sort of an incentive for miners earlier when there weren't very many transactions, and it's less important now that there are a lot more miners.
Okay, hey Doug, you back?
Yeah.
Okay, I think Pat covered a majority of what we were asking about transactions.
Okay. I'll just say one thing that I think is kind of interesting. So and then we'll move on. So with the binary chain, we can easily double the transaction capacity on VeriCoin, for instance, and Verium, and then Amazon's transaction per second is around 600 transactions per second. So if Verium if Verium was mined to the extent that Litecoin is currently mined, we would start approaching VeriCoin would start approaching that level of transaction throughput. So essentially, we foresee the ability to scale sufficient that we approach Amazon accepting VeriCoin payments, which buys us a lot of scalability, I think.
Okay. Okay, so I had a question about the peer-to-peer pool. Someone asked, the Bitcoin peer-to-peer pool effectively kills smaller miners, though its share mechanism. Is this being modified for Verium?
So, so this is an interesting question. So with Verium, because a GPU and an ASIC can't mine, there isn't a discrepancy of a $300 investment for one person is a 500 times plus increase in performance for another person with a CPU. So inherently in the Verium mining network, it's orders of magnitude more flat. So P2 pool on the Verium mining network will not have the same properties as ASICs do on Bitcoin, and the very most recently released ASICs, et cetera, that really ends up changing the game. But one of the things that we're optimizing for P2 pool is the balance between the transaction fee size and how many blocks are used for the share averaging, and ultimately the payout that a small miner would get. So we're going to try and design a system where a smartphone miner can get a payout in a reasonable time frame on the P2 pool network. And that's going to be a balance of basically the share rate block averaging. We may have to go out much longer averaging than, say, the standard P2 pool. We're working on those parameters right now. But our goal is to basically have a smartphone or an Odroid that gets a payout from the P2 pool much more, obviously way more frequently than you would solo mining, and frequently enough such that you feel comfortable looking at your share rate and your payout your payout frequency, you know, that your mining is working, you're getting your earnings.
Okay, Pat, you want to add to that, or?
No, I think Doug covered it well.
Okay. Okay. Question about hardware wallets and staking. What are you guys' thoughts on staking in hardware wallets?
Pat, you want to answer this one? You might know.
Well, so the idea behind hardware wallets, you know, and I have my Trezor right here, for example, is they're even more secure, which means you don't. Anytime you want to do anything, you have to type in a PIN and a password, or just a PIN, depending on what kind it is. It doesn't. In order to create a stake transaction, it requires that your wallet is in at least some sort of pseudo unlock state, which means you have basically the password is stored in the memory, and you lose some inherent security when you do that. And so it sort of goes against the principles of staking. So, you know, I haven't. It would be great if there were a way to do it, and there might be a way to do it, but it isn't something we've really explored very much right now, especially because we've had some conversations with some of the hardware wallet manufacturers, and they basically require us to order, you know, an insane quantity of them to even get support. Like, for example, I think Ledger wanted us to basically buy like 1,000 ledgers, right? And I wasn't the one that interacted with them, but it doesn't really makes sense to me right now to focus on that, because, you know, we have a finite amount of resources, and we can only really spread so much before we start, you know, inhibiting some other sort of progress. But I mean, in theory, it's a good idea. I think, you know, if another coin that is similar enough did it, and we could just fork their code, we would definitely want to do that if we thought it was secure. But it's not really a priority, at least for me.
Okay, I have another question about Raspberry Pis and staking. I don't know if you guys want to talk about, we're kind of working on something related to this. Will you make the VeriCoin wallet work on Raspberry Pis? I think we already do on a low energy device.
I can answer this. Okay.
Okay.
So currently it's a little tricky to compile the wallet on Raspberry Pi because of the native Linux distro it comes with, and there's people working on making this process easier. But the other thing is, when we complete porting VeriCoin to the recent Bitcoin core database code base, it will be much more compatible with Raspberry Pis in a number of ways, because the in memory chain data is reduced. The Linux compatibility is more general. There's a lot of improvements we get from upgrading Bitcoin Core that make the whole process of compiling on something like a Raspberry Pi much easier and much more compatible with Raspberry Pi's hardware memory limitations mostly. So we're working on this, making it easier. It's possible for sure, and then ultimately porting to Bitcoin Core is going to make it very compatible.
Okay. Next question. The VeriCoin interest payments from staking incentives for investors to buy and stake their VeriCoin. What's the incentive to hold Verium?
Okay, I would like to hear Pat's answer to this too, but I'll give you my opinion. So this is basically a subjective question, largely psychological, and based on economic theory that an individual may subscribe to. But in my opinion, I'm a believer in the economic theory where the value is proportional to the cost of production in terms of cryptocurrency. So the way, when we originally had created VeriCoin, we had created a system that was a seamless, very low cost, fast payment system. But at the same time, we also realized that there was no cost of production, which is a benefit in the sense that you can keep fees just for spam prevention. You don't need to have a fee market for security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a downside in terms of what the value may be ultimately pegged to. If there is a peg in cryptocurrency of value, what is it for proof of stake? It's hard to imagine because there's no cost of production. But in the case of the binary chain, we have both a cost of production system and a costless production system. So in my opinion, VeriCoin is going to be improved as a currency via the binary chain, and that will improve its value. And there's also the incentive for earning interest. And Verium, to me, is its value, in my personal opinion, based on the cost of production theory of value, is that Verium's value will be proportional to the cost of production in electricity terms of each Verium. And this will be proportional to basically the hash rate. So to me, we're basically, Verium is bringing into VeriCoin and to the ecosystem an electric cost that will enable a value floor in the context of that theory. So if we're successful in having Verium be mined in smartphones across the world, and the cost of production of Verium goes up and the sale of Verium by miners, the value that they sell at must ultimately also go up, then the reason for holding Verium is that we have an increasing cost of production and thus increasing value. So to me, it's a tangible value proposition, and in that context, a good store of value.
Yeah, I think Doug sort of hit the nail on the head. It's our way of attaching, and the reason you want to hold on to it is because it keeps getting harder and harder to get, which means if you will keep trying to get it, like, it goes up. So basically exactly what Doug said, with the tie to energy, people are buying these computers or these other mining systems to do it. The idea behind Verium was that people already should own equipment that's good enough to do it, and they sort of do. Anyone with any regular processor, a laptop, a cell phone, etc., they can generate a proportional amount of Verium as compared to how many devices they own. For example, a server, which I use to mine Verium, can hash at about 3,000 or around 3,000 hashes per minute. But a cell phone, which I have that I've had for 3 or 4 years just sitting around as an old cell phone, can mine at about 1/6 of that speed, and it's basically free. Like it uses only a couple of watts. So the idea is you don't have orders of magnitude difference like you did with Bitcoin, with Litecoin, where you go from mining with a CPU to a GPU, and boom, all of a sudden your CPU that you spent a lot of money for to mine Bitcoin is only 1/100th the speed of a GPU. And then you buy a GPU, and then all of a sudden people are mining on FPGAs, which are 15 or 20 times faster. So you buy an FPGA, and then all of a sudden people are mining with ASICs, which are 1,000 times faster. So you don't have these big jumps. Anyone with any processor, any general purpose processor with enough RAM can be competitive and mine a reasonable amount. You're probably not going to get rich on it instantly, but you'll be able to make some profit over time.
Okay. Smart contracts. Smart contracts are always a big topic in the crypto space. Will we be implementing these or using these on the binary chain?
So one thing that I'm pretty happy with is we had a developer named Verilisk, who's a PhD student at I think it's Johns Hopkins. He's a really smart guy, and he's working on some other stuff in crypto too. Him and I worked together to try to get this idea I had of building blockchain applications using some of this extra space in the blockchain. So what we did was we created the ability to embed information, and this information can be data. It could be, I say hi to Doug, or it can be metadata, such as like something you would see like a hash from a Segwit transaction. And so this data can be anything. You can use it for smart contracts, for example, like was asked. You can use it for embedding, a driver's license. If you want to prove you're who you are, or if you want to, embed biometrics, there are plenty of uses that people have thought about for using blockchains to store data. So it creates a really powerful layer for you to be able to do a lot of stuff. And this includes communication, like messaging. It allows you to hook into it for, let's say you have a really important document and you want to make sure it doesn't get lost. You can encrypt it and stick it on there. And because the blockchain works where every new block is built off the old ones, you have an order in which you can process these things. So you can, based on time, figure out when things happen. So for example, a smart contract, you could say, okay, well, block 1,000, I entered a contract with Doug, and it said by block 1,010, if a certain event happens, I'll give Doug some VeriCoin. And the node will count, okay, block 1,000, block 1,001, 1,002, etc., until it gets to 1,010, and it'll say, okay, well, did these things happen? And if they did, it'll make sure that it's enforced, and if it didn't, it won't. And these are all just a very small number of things we can do with this data layer that we built into VeriCoin and Verium. So yes, we can have smart contracts. We could have a lot more, much more complicated things on top of that.
Yeah, and I'll also say one thing in this regard. We basically are doing things in a, I guess, a different way than most people, where where we have an on-chain scaling mechanism first, and now we're building essentially an ecosystem on top of that, on which we can have, like Pat said, via the data passage capability, many possibilities. But at the same time, Ethereum transaction costs are $1, I think, last time I looked, and they're doing more transactions per second. They're up to, like, I think 14 transactions per second. But we saw where CryptoKitties basically wreaked havoc on the Ethereum blockchain, and there was basically the Uncle blocks, which is essentially like mini forks. The frequency goes crazy. and all these other things. The exchanges, like their servers are melting when people are like going crazy over CryptoKitties, and they have to keep on upgrading their servers to handle this. So we're basically trying to get we've been focused really on getting the foundation right, having two separate chains, having a scaling mechanism for handling the data, building a mini. It's kind of funny to say, but like a mini digital economy with stakers and miners, and shared security model, and increasing transaction speed, and then have this infrastructural ecosystem in place to then go to the next level, but have the capacity to do it in a real world way, on an as needed basis, essentially.
Okay. On that, let's talk about hybrid coins versus the binary chain. Have you ever heard of coins with hybrid POS and POW protocols? Obviously, slightly different than POST and POWT protocols for VeriCoin and Verium, but a single coin that can be both staked and mined seems to make marketing and messaging more clear. Why are having protocols on separate coins an advantage, or two separate chains?
Yeah, so we actually talked about this earlier with VeriCoin, for example, where there's both proof of work and proof of stake blocks that come out. But the downside to that is you don't have the sort of detachment for a commodity versus a currency, and you also lose you don't have the security that you have with both independent systems. And like we were talking about before, VeriCoin only one of the two actually produces any real work and can raise the difficulty of the blocks.
Okay. You mean PureCoin, right?
Oh, sorry, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
PureCoin, not VeriCoin.
Yeah. And I'll say this too. Like, so for instance, you cannot have. Well, you could, but I don't know if it would actually work. In theory, you could potentially do it, but like you're not going to have a value that's proportional to cost, that's averaged over a costless proof of stake system, et cetera, and you're not going to. In the case of all hybrid POS, they basically choose a consensus system that dominates, and it's basically POS. So the POW. It has a factor of 1 in the consensus, and the POS has like an astronomically high factor. So so really the hybrid coins up to this point are really primarily one consensus system that happens to have another one. But the other key point here is you can't pay miners a high fee and also have users have a low fee on the same coin. There might be a weird way to do it, but there's no clear way to handle that in a secure way without having just two separate chains. The other benefit we get is distributed data across two chains. We can have protocols that are tailored, which we do, specifically for mining and specifically for proof of stake. So we have tons more flexibility. We have better security across two separate networks with, in many cases, totally different people on them, with different incentives that might, in an ideal way, misaligned, such that the decentralization is enhanced. So there's a lot of benefits actually to having two chains. It's not just more is better. There's actually a lot of benefits to it.
Okay, this one's about supply. What made you come up with an infinity supply of stakeable and mineable coins? And what is the advantage of this over maximum limited coins? So like Bitcoin and Litecoin, I guess, are limited, right? So they're just asking what's the advantages, I guess.
So if you look at like a macroeconomic perspective of how countries' currencies work, they all require some minimal inflation level in most circumstances, unless you're in Japan right now. That's sort of the only time where there's ever been a case to be made for reducing inflation to 0 or below 0. The idea behind it is things are going to go up in price no matter what. because people always are greedy and they want to make money, and companies want to maximize, they want to be able to grow revenue, and it's a good indicator of economic progress. And so, if we had an economy where VeriCoin was the only sort of tradable, currency, didn't have dollars, didn't have Bitcoin, didn't have anything else, if you didn't have expansion and inflation, you start to see poor economic indicators, and it's generally a bad thing. So the idea was we wanted to sort of keep it with a conventional economics viewpoint of how monetary supply can work and how it works best. And by injecting additional capital into the system, you have the opportunity for continued growth. So that's sort of the idea behind why it doesn't have a hard cap on it.
Make a couple comments on this as well. So the other thing to put that in context is, in 100 years we'll have less coins on the market than VeriCoin, I think it is, or 50 years, and we'll never before like the sun melts the earth have as many coins as Ripple, for example. So that's one comment. And Verium, in the next 50 to 100 years, I forget what the exact chart is now. There's a chart that has it that we tweet out to explain this to people. Verium will basically always, in our lifetimes and beyond, be a lower supply than Bitcoin. So we have a disinflation mechanism, which is a shrinking inflation rate, because it's proportional to in the case of VeriCoin, the initial supply released via mining, and in the case of Verium, a shrinking inflation rate due to the computational power increases. So we have a shrinking inflation rate that will never get to astronomical levels, and at the same time, it enables like Pat was saying, basically a reliable economic growth. Like, you can project out a rough, on average, linear shrinking inflation rate and base estimates on that. And one benefit of that is, in the case of Bitcoin, if Bitcoin goes to $100,000 per coin, let's say, one Satoshi is going to be, I think, 10 cents, if I'm doing the math off the top of my head correctly. So basically, if you absolutely have a hard cap, you're going to get to a point where you're actually going to start pricing out lower income societies. So, or not just people, lower income people. So we have, this very low supply mechanism that is predictable, that is tuned by the amount of people staking and the computational power, and doesn't necessarily price future generations out of using it. It still enables a lot of value growth in terms of its lack of bloated supply, I would say.
Okay. This question's about promotion in 2018. What things do you have planned for promotion in 2018? I think Pat probably has some things to talk about that.
Yeah, so one of our ideas, so if anyone remembers, when we created Verium, we raised some money into an endowment. And the endowment is coins that we just permanently stake. And the idea behind it is we're not going to touch the initial amount of money that was brought into the endowment, and we're not going to touch any of the donations to it, but we can use the staked interest to help with some stuff. And that, in addition with some fundraising we've been doing on the VeriCoin website, on the VeriCoin crowdsourcing website, we're trying to raise some money right now for a project I came up with called Why VeriCoin. And the idea behind it is, now I work in finance. I deal with people that are, of course, they see Bitcoin broke $10,000 back in December, and they say, okay, well, what is this? Maybe I should start thinking about this now. Then they hear, there's all these problems. You can't send Bitcoin transactions without huge fees, and it takes a long time to wait for the Bitcoins to come, and there's all these deals with people using it for illegitimate purchases on darknet markets and that kind of stuff. And they're afraid that They're going to send a transaction. They'll be waiting for days for it to go through. And so you have all these scared investors that want some exposure to cryptocurrency. And meanwhile, we have this really good currency right here. VeriCoin initially was created to be a good currency, and that was the initial plan. We're adding more stuff to it, but it's still a really, really good currency. It's very fast. I don't know if you guys have tried sending VeriCoin transactions just to see how fast it is, but it's pretty much instantaneous. And you can get confirmations within a minute. And with Binary Chain, it'll be even faster than that. So we have a lot of things we can tout. We can tout the speed. We can tout the low fees. The fees are essentially zero. We can discuss, and explain and compare the fact that we don't have to mine it. Bitcoin's extremely expensive economically to mine because you have people running these farms of ASICs burning just energy. They're just turning energy into Bitcoin, which is great because it pairs Bitcoin's value with the dollar or with a piece of coal or oil or whatever. But people are always going to be obsessed with the idea that it's costing a real visible percentage of the world's energy output. And of course, with energy coming from mostly unclean sources, is probably bad for the environment. So we have this green currency that's fast. Why don't we talk about that? We don't need to get into we have a binary chain, or we don't need to get into we had all these interesting things we're working on. We can still talk about the really good intrinsic value because it's a fast, cheap, and eco-friendly currency. So the idea is we're going to start really selling this idea to the masses in a very simple to understand way, not as complicated as the VeriCoin website. A simple website and other media where we just discuss the really nice core attributes of VeriCoin. And so one of my ideas, I work in New York City, was why don't we put up a billboard or some, a sign in subway stations or on the subway cars or in front of the Port Authority bus terminal or somewhere with high visibility where a lot of people that are thinking about cryptocurrencies are walking by them. They don't really have much experience or interaction with them otherwise. They'll walk by every day. They'll say, hey, why VeriCoin? Oh, what the heck is VeriCoin? Well, they'll go to the website, whyvericoin.com, and they'll learn about it. And it's a really simple way for us to get people that are curious about Bitcoin, curious about cryptocurrencies. They can learn about the really cool things about VeriCoin and why they should consider that as well. So a real way to market directly to the masses. And that's sort of one of my pet projects I'm working on right now. I don't know if the fundraiser has gone up yet, but it will soon if it hasn't. And we're going to be, I think we've decided we're going to be matching all the funds raised with VeriCoin Verifund marketing budget, which we've raised from donations in the past and from some of the stake endowment. So we want to get this going. Hopefully we can hit when a lot of people are walking by, a good season where you have a lot of people in finance. It would have been really nice to do it around now because February is the traditional bonus season where a lot of people that I know in finance have been talking about going and putting some of that money into cryptocurrency soon. But there are plenty of good times, and New York is always full of these people. All they need to do is think, oh, well, I didn't know about VeriCoin before. Maybe I'll buy $100 worth or something. And that's really what can get the fire started.
Okay. Doug, do you want to add that or no? No?
Sorry, I was muted. No, I think Pat answered that well.
All right. Next question. Just one sec here. So someone wanted to know if there was a plan or any type of masternode in the future for Verium.
Okay, I can answer this. So we're not going to do a masternode in the traditional sense. We have no plans for that. What we are going to build, though, is a decentralized exchange mechanism as part of the binary chain. We want people to be able to trade VeriCoin for Verium person to person with basically a simplified smart contract with a multi-signature transaction with a time limit on it, like what Pat was describing. And when we want to enable that within our digital ecosystem from the Gemini wallet, This will be a great technological feat, and it will also really utilize the cryptography that we have access to via blockchain technology, and it'll remove the need for trading, at least between VeriCoin and Verium, via a third party such as a centralized exchange. Now, for P2P trading to actually happen, what you'll actually need is people who act as mini self-run decentralized exchangers, effectively. Now, these individuals may choose, rather than mining, rather than staking, to say, I'm going to put up some P2P decentralized trading bids and asks for VeriCoin or Verium or both. And I'm going to basically charge a premium that I think is fair at the trade rate. And I'm going to be in competition with other people who are trying to do the same thing. So we envision a financial ecosystem where we have miners, stakers, and ideally decentralized exchangers that are basically providing volume for P2P trading. Now, for these people to provide volume, they'll need to have some number of coins. We're not going to require some number of coins, but if you want to be a successful decentralized exchanger, you would need coins. And in a sense, this is now getting closer to like a masternode type concept. But to be honest, I think masternodes are basically a way of bringing a network in the traditional sense, a network further from fully distributed and closer to clustered, and one step a little closer to centralized, where certain nodes have more authority over others. So I'm kind of opposed to a consensus running through a superior elite class of nodes, but I'm not opposed to exchangers having volume enabling a decentralized P2P trading network. So that's basically my take on the masternode metaphor people have been talking about.
Pat, you got anything to add to that, or?
No, I think it makes sense. The idea behind masternodes is basically to make people, hold on to their coins, and that's great. But it doesn't really allow true supply and demand to happen. Not only that, but you don't really get. It's basically a way to incentivize people to have full nodes, and we think the incentives there for VeriCoin already, and for Verium, the idea is people can solo mine reasonably still. It might take them a month to mine a block, but then they save that transaction fee from mining at a pool. So, I don't really see the major need for it. But like Doug said, if you want to be basically someone that can handle, help with the volatility and help with the volume of a decentralized exchange, you're going to want to keep it there because you'll collect some fees from it. So essentially, you get the same benefit.
Okay. So we're coming up on over 60 minutes here for the AMA. Do you guys want to do any closing statements or anything like that, or?
I guess I'll do a closing statement, and then Pat can do one, and you can do one too, Richard, if you want. We're really excited about what we're working on. We're one of the things we're working with Kevin on, which is going to be very important this year, and Richard is playing a major role in this as well, is communicating all these things that we've discussed with you guys who tend to be more crypto aficionados, and putting it in terms that the general public can understand, because that's ultimately what we want to do, is provide a currency and a reserve for anyone and everyone, and that's kind of the key in terms of communication with the new website, with the binary chain, with the dual blockchain system. Really, what it all boils down to is creating a financial ecosystem where you have a low cost currency and a high value store of value system in a digital reserve. And the key distinction being, we don't just have, you know, like people are saying now, Bitcoin is digital gold, and you know, Litecoin is like better as currency. You could think of it that way, but their security model, they are not benefiting from shared security. So we are basically trying to communicate that you can have a currency in reserve, a supply peg, a security, performance mechanism in the currency as far as transaction speed, low cost, that's proportional to the security added by the reserve. And these are the details. These are the like tech specs. The binary chain, in a sense, is the tech specs. But really what we're really talking about here is digital currency and digital gold, digital reserve, bringing them together to create a better system, a better currency, a better store of value, and not creating an environment where the two things are opposed to one another. The protocol is limiting one versus the other. We want to leverage both sides of the equation and have an overall better system. And then have this be the foundation of an ecosystem on which many things can occur. So that's like the key overall point that I'd want to make.
Yeah, so I guess in what I've been thinking about, my main goals for this year, you know, we get binary chain activated, but even more importantly is we start really sharing. You know, we have this very stable, very fast, and very good currency, and we have a good commodity that literally anyone in the world that has a computer or a smartphone can mine. And there's really no reason that we can't spread that word and get people interested. And sort of related to that, you know, people have asked in some of the questions in the AMA, and like, we don't normally like to talk about price because that's not really our focus. I mean, of course it's important. People don't want to invest in something and lose a lot of money. Likewise, you know, you see there's not actually very much VeriCoin and Verium on these exchanges. There's only about 1 million, maybe 1.5 million VeriCoin. So that's called the float. So out of 30 million, you know, outstanding VeriCoins, there's only, you know, around 3% of it on these exchanges. So if we can get people out there interested buying it, you know, they buy 500 VeriCoin or 1,000 VeriCoin, suddenly you start seeing that float go down, and you don't have the ability for these people to, you know, manipulate the markets as easily. When there's somebody interested in buying and they want to be they are really want to get invested into it, they buy 1,000, and if the float's 100,000, they're going to send the price up a lot. And, you know, we don't necessarily want to manipulate prices or anything like that. In fact, we don't want to manipulate prices, but generally you'll see as more people know about it, more people are interested, you see the whole ecosystem benefiting. So it's really the kind of thing where we need to get the word out there. We need people to start thinking about it and realize, you know, the potential uses. Once they do that, you know, we'll see the amount of people that can just pump and dump something like VeriCoin go away because it'll be too expensive for them to really do it. And we'll see real growth in value just due to the intrinsic benefits of VeriCoin and Verium. You have basically the core of the coin, you know, fast for VeriCoin, really easy to use. And for Verium, you have something that anyone can get in on. They can all mine it. And it's a good way to keep money and keep it paired with something like electricity. So basically, to sum it up, I think we get the word out, and that should be one of our main focuses this year. Hopefully, we're probably going to be counting on some donations to help run some real things. There's actually a really cool project we're not really ready to talk about yet, but it could involve some publicity on TV, for example, and maybe some short advertisements. We just got the contract, I think, yesterday, but I don't know if it's been signed or not. But you know, keep your eyes open for that, because that could actually be really, really big. And would be a really good way to explain in simple terms the ideas behind VeriCoin and Verium to the masses. And I think once that happens, VeriCoin and Verium it could go crazy. People people will start talking about it. You know, other people will that don't know anything about cryptocurrency will be interested. People that know about cryptocurrency but want to learn about something that isn't Bitcoin will be interested, and that's really where we should go, I think, from here.
Awesome. So I just want to thank Doug and Pat for joining us for the AMA. If we missed any of the questions or we didn't answer your questions, I'll be available on Slack. You can always just ping me on Slack, Verimad, and I can try and answer all your questions. And if you submitted any questions on Reddit, we'll try and answer those as well. But we'll try and make this a regular thing where we do a live AMA every couple of weeks or every month if we can. Just keep everyone updated. More information, the better, right? Doug, Pat, anything else? All good?
Yeah, thanks a lot for tuning in.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Catch you later.